As secretion increases, levels of the hormone in circulation increases. And as hormone concentration goes up, the cellular response increases. You get a bigger effect. And the whole function of the effect, of producing that effect, is to negate the stimulus. So if the problem is low blood glucose, the effect needs to be an increase in blood glucose until we're back to the normal range. Once we get back to the normal range, there is no more problem, there is no more stimulus, and so the negative feedback loop stops. We've corrected the problem. So once the problem is fixed, what should happen to levels of that particular hormone? Kind of go back down to sort of a baseline. Good time to remind you of something I mentioned a lot last semester. The nervous system and the endocrine system do not operate as on and off switches. Right? It's not a cell is secreting the hormone or it's not. It's a matter of how much. All secretory cells secrete hormone all the time. They're never off. They're on. It's a question of how much hormone is being secreted. Neurons are the same. Autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic and parasympathetic are active to some degree all the time. Not a switch, a dial. Right? And I always come back to heart rate as an example. What's keeping heart rate low under resting conditions? It's not that sympathetic is off. The dial is just turned down pretty low. There's very little epi and norepi binding to receptors on those cardiomyocytes. But there's a lot of ACH being released from the parasympathetic fibers. Right? So having sympathetic turned down really low and parasympathetic turned up pretty high, that keeps your heart rate down. So if you want to change your heart rate from 60 beats per minute to 100 beats per minute, what do? Start turning down parasympathetic and start turning up sympathetic. Now, it is possible to get your heart rate up to 100 without using sympathetic at all. Right? And we know that because that's exactly what happens when you cut the vagus nerve. If you stop all parasympathetic output to the heart, it jumps up to 100. You want to get it above 100, you're going to have to use sympathetic. So that tells you under resting conditions, you have parasympathetic tone to the heart, keeping the rate nice and low. Negative feedback is influenced by the circadian rhythm. There's many ways to describe this thing called the circadian rhythm. It's also called the sleep-wake cycle, the light-dark cycle, the diurnal rhythm. And it tends to influence many of the hormones released throughout the body. Cortisol, for example. Cortisol is the stress hormone. But what's going to happen to cortisol levels, cortisol secretion, over the course of 24 hours without any fight or flight event? No stress. You might predict that cortisol levels remain very, very stable, right? If there's no stress, there's no stimulus, nothing causing it to go up. But if you watch cortisol levels over 24 hours, they fluctuate. When are they naturally really high? No stress, no stimulus. First thing in the morning. When are they really low? Late at night and while you're sleeping. So what are we doing? There's no stimulus, so how are we changing the hormone concentration? How are we changing the amount of hormone these cells are secreting? We're changing the set point. Right? So the sleep-wake cycle, this daily rhythm, has an influence on the set point for many different hormones. So cortisol is supposed to be higher in the morning, it's supposed to be lower at night. And we'll keep it that way by adjusting the set point. Second, negative feedback can be overridden by the nervous system, and we see this during a stress response. So maybe absent the stress, Hormones are trying to keep blood glucose levels nice and stable, as they should. So let's say you're at 100 mg per deciliter. Just perfect. If it was to rise to 130 mg per deciliter, would that be considered normal, or are we starting to become hyperglycemic? The range is 80 to 120, by the way. Starting to become hyperglycemic. And so what should happen when blood glucose levels start to rise above the normal range? Insulin levels should go up and glucagon levels should go down, and that should bring it back to the normal range. That would happen except, let's say, stress is introduced. Now we have a fight or flight response. What's going to happen to blood glucose levels? They're going to go up, and they're going to go up above the normal range. And that's okay. That's what we need right now. Right? The whole point of fight or flight is to prepare for action, to give your skeletal muscles and your heart muscle all the extra nutrients and oxygen it's going to need to do all this extra work. Right? Because when your muscles go from resting to contracting, metabolic rate can go up tenfold. So they're doing a lot more work. They need a lot more nutrients. So we purposely keep blood glucose levels elevated. It's not the endocrine system doing that. In fact, it would like to get it back to normal. It's the nervous system overriding it. All right, so those are two key points to keep in mind when it comes to negative feedback. Don't assume that over the course of a day that a particular hormone is going to remain really level in terms of concentration. It may be affected by the circadian rhythm and fluctuate accordingly. And also keep in mind that although the endocrine system is using these various negative feedback loops to keep certain hormones stable, there may be a situation like fight or flight where we actually need to elevate a particular hormone. And then going back to that scenario, it would be glucagon. The nervous system is going to stimulate the secretion of glucagon and inhibit insulin, even though blood glucose is already high, right? The complete opposite of what you would expect. Question?
Can you get enough sleep so cortisol levels can they still be low even though you're awake?
I don't think the amount of sleep affects cortisol levels as much as just the normal sleep-wake cycle. Okay, so maybe calling it that is contradictory. The light-dark cycle or the diurnal rhythm. So whether you slept 8 hours or didn't sleep at all, I would suspect 6 a.m. they're still going to be up pretty high, and 11 p.m. that night they're going to go down pretty low. But interesting question, and there may be